Chapter 26. The Cave. Harry could smell salt and hear rushing waves. A light, chilly breeze ruffled his hair, and he looked out at moonlit sea and star-strewn sky. He was standing upon a high outcrop of dark rock, water foaming and churning below him. He glanced over his shoulder. A towering cliff stood behind them, a sheer drop, black and faceless. A few large chunks of rock, such as the one upon which Harry and Dumbledore were standing, looked as though they had broken away from the cliff face at some point in the past. It was a bleak, harsh view, the sea and the rock unrelieved by any tree or sweep of grass or sand. "What do you think?" asked Dumbledore. He might have been asking Harry's opinion on whether it was a good site for a picnic. "They brought the kids from the orphanage here?" asked Harry, who could not imagine a less cozy spot for a day trip. "Not here, precisely," said Dumbledore. "There is a village of sorts about halfway along the cliffs behind us. I believe the orphans were taken there for a little sea air and a view of the waves. No, I think it was only ever Tom Riddle and his youthful victims who visited this spot. No Muggle could reach this rock unless they were uncommonly good mountaineers, and boats cannot approach the cliffs. The waters around them are too dangerous. I imagine that Riddle climbed down. Magic would have served better than ropes, and he brought 2 small children with him, probably for the pleasure of terrorizing them. I think the journey alone would have done it, don't you?" Harry looked up again at the cliff and felt goosebumps. "But his final destination, and ours, lies a little further on. Come." Dumbledore beckoned Harry to the very edge of the rock, where a series of jagged niches made footholds leading down to boulders that lay half submerged in water and closer to the cliff. It was a treacherous descent, and Dumbledore, hampered slightly by his withered hand, moved slowly. The lower rocks were slippery with seawater. Harry could feel flecks of cold salt spray hitting his face. "Lumos," said Dumbledore as he reached the boulder closest to the cliff face. 1,000 flecks of golden light sparkled upon the dark surface of the water a few feet below where he crouched. The black wall of rock beside him was illuminated too. "You see," said Dumbledore quietly, holding his wand a little higher. Harry saw a fissure in the cliff into which dark water was swirling. "You will not object to getting a little wet?" "No," said Harry. "Then take off your invisibility cloak. There is no need for it now. And let us take the plunge." And with the sudden agility of a much younger man, Dumbledore slid from the boulder, landed in the sea, and began to swim, with a perfect breaststroke toward the dark slit in the rock face, his lit wand held in his teeth. Harry pulled off his cloak, stuffed it into his pocket, and followed. The water was icy. Harry's waterlogged clothes billowed around him and weighed him down. Taking deep breaths that filled his nostrils with a tang of salt and seaweed, he struck out for the shimmering, shrinking light, now moving deeper into the cliff. The fissure soon opened into a dark tunnel that Harry could tell would be filled with water at high tide. The slimy walls were barely 3 feet apart and glimmered like wet tar in the passing light of Dumbledore's wand. A little way in, the passageway curved to the left, and Harry saw that it extended far into the cliff. He continued to swim in Dumbledore's wake, the tips of his benumbed fingers brushing the rough, wet rock. Then he saw Dumbledore rising out of the water ahead, his silver hair and dark robes gleaming. When Harry reached the spot, he found the steps that led into a large cave. He clambered up them, water streaming from his soaking clothes, and emerged shivering uncontrollably into the still and freezing air. Dumbledore was standing in the middle of the cave, his wand held high as he turned slowly on the spot, examining the walls and the ceiling. "Yes, this is the place," said Dumbledore. "How can you tell?" Harry spoke in a whisper. "It has known magic," said Dumbledore simply. Harry could not tell whether the shivers he was experiencing were due to his spine-deep coldness or to the same awareness of enchantments. He watched as Dumbledore continued to revolve on the spot, evidently concentrating on things Harry could not see. "This is merely the antechamber, the entrance hall," said Dumbledore after a moment or two. "We need to penetrate the inner place. Now it is only Lord Voldemort's obstacles that stand in our way, rather than those nature made." Dumbledore approached the wall of the cave and caressed it with his blackened fingertips, murmuring words in a strange tongue that Harry did not understand. Twice, Dumbledore walked right around the cave, touching as much of the rough rock as he could, occasionally pausing, running his fingers backward and forward over a particular spot, until finally he stopped. his hand pressed flat against the wall. "Here," he said. "We go on through here. The entrance is concealed." Harry did not ask how Dumbledore knew. He had never seen a wizard work things out like this simply by looking and touching. But Harry had long since learned that bangs and smoke were more often the marks of ineptitude than expertise. Dumbledore stepped back from the cave wall and pointed his wand at the rock. For a moment, an arched outline appeared there, blazing white as though there was a powerful light behind the crack. "You've done it," said Harry through chattering teeth. But before the words left his lips, the outline had gone, leaving the rock as bare and solid as ever. Dumbledore looked around. "Harry, I'm so sorry I forgot," he said. He now pointed his wand at Harry, and at once Harry's clothes were as warm and dry as if they had been hanging in front of a blazing fire. "Thank you," said Harry gratefully. But Dumbledore had already turned his attention back to the solid cave wall. He did not try any more magic, but simply stood there staring at it intently, as though something extremely interesting was written on it. Harry stayed quite still. He did not want to break Dumbledore's concentration. Then, after 2 solid minutes, Dumbledore said quietly, "Oh, surely not. So crude." "What is it, Professor?" "I rather think," said Dumbledore, putting his uninjured hand inside his robes and drawing out a short silver knife of the kind Harry used to chop potion ingredients, "that we are required to make payment to pass." "Payment?" said Harry. "You've got to give the door something?" "Yes," said Dumbledore. "Blood, if I am not much mistaken." "Blood?" "I said it was crude," said Dumbledore, who sounded disdainful, even disappointed, as though Voldemort had fallen short of the standards Dumbledore expected. "The idea, as I am sure you will have gathered, is that your enemy must weaken him or herself to enter. Once again, Lord Voldemort fails to grasp that there are much more terrible things than physical injury." "Yeah, but still, if you can avoid it," said Harry, who had experienced enough pain not to be keen for more. "Sometimes, however, it is unavoidable," said Dumbledore, shaking back the sleeve of his robes and exposing the forearm of his injured hand. "Professor!" protested Harry, hurrying forward as Dumbledore raised his knife. "I'll do it. He did not know what he was going to say. Younger? Fitter? But Dumbledore merely smiled. There was a flash of silver and a spurt of scarlet. The rock face was peppered with dark, glistening drops. "You are very kind, Harry," said Dumbledore, now passing the tip of his wand over the deep cut he had made in his own arm, so that it healed instantly, just as Snape had healed Malfoy's wounds. "But your blood is worth more than mine." "Ah, that seems to have done the trick, doesn't it?" The blazing silver outline of an arch had appeared in the wall once more, and this time it did not fade away. The blood-spattered rock within it simply vanished, leaving an opening into what seemed total darkness. "After me, I think," said Dumbledore, and he walked through the archway with Harry on his heels, lighting his own wand hastily as he went. An eerie sight met their eyes. They were standing on the edge of a great black lake, so vast that Harry could not make out the distant banks in a cavern so high that the ceiling too was out of sight. A misty greenish light shone far away in what looked like the middle of the lake. It was reflected in the completely still water below. The greenish glow and the light from the 2 wands were the only things that broke the otherwise velvety blackness, though their rays did not penetrate as far as Harry would have expected. The darkness was somehow denser than normal darkness. "Let us walk," said Dumbledore quietly. "Be very careful not to step into the water. Stay close to me." He set off around the edge of the lake, and Harry followed close behind him. Their footsteps made echoing, slapping sounds on the narrow rim of rock that surrounded the water. On and on they walked, but the view did not vary. On one side of them, the rough cavern wall, on the other, the boundless expanse of smooth, glassy blackness, in the very middle of which was that mysterious greenish glow. Harry found the place in the silence oppressive, unnerving. "Professor," he said finally, "do you think the Horcrux is here?" "Oh, yes," said Dumbledore. "Yes, I'm sure it is. The question is, how do we get to it?" We couldn't just try a summoning charm," Harry said, sure that it was a stupid suggestion, but he was much keener than he was prepared to admit on getting out of this place as soon as possible. "Certainly we could," said Dumbledore, stopping so suddenly that Harry almost walked into him. "Why don't you do it?" "Me? Oh, okay. Harry had not expected this, but cleared his throat and said loudly, wand aloft, Accio Horcrux! With a noise like an explosion, something very large and pale erupted out of the dark water some 20 feet away before Harry could see what it was, and then it had vanished again with a crashing splash that made great deep ripples on the mirrored surface. Harry leapt backward in shock and hit the wall. His heart was still thundering as he turned to Dumbledore. What was that? Something, I think, that is ready to respond should we attempt to seize the Horcrux. Harry looked back at the water. The surface of the lake was once more shining black glass. The ripples had vanished unnaturally fast. Harry's heart, however, was still pounding. Did you think that would happen, sir? I thought something would happen if we made an obvious attempt to get our hands on the Horcrux. That was a very good idea, Harry. Much the simplest way of finding out what we are facing. But we don't know what that thing was, said Harry, looking at the sinisterly smooth water. What the things are, you mean? Said Dumbledore. I doubt very much that there is only one of them. Shall we walk on? Professor? Yes, Harry? Do you think we're going to have to go into the lake? Into it? Oh, only if we are very unfortunate. You don't think the Horcrux is at the bottom? Oh, no. I think the Horcrux is in the middle. And Dumbledore pointed toward the misty green light in the center of the lake. So we're going to have to cross the lake to get to it? Yes, I think so. Harry did not say anything. His thoughts were all of water monsters, of giant serpents, of demons, kelpies, and spirits. Aha, said Dumbledore, and he stopped again. This time, Harry really did walk into him. For a moment, he toppled on the edge of the dark water, and Dumbledore's uninjured hand closed tightly around his upper arm, pulling him back. So sorry, Harry. I should have given a warning. Stand back against the wall, please. I think I have found the place. Harry had no idea what Dumbledore meant. This patch of dark bank was exactly like every other bit, as far as he could tell, but Dumbledore seemed to have detected something special about it. This time, he was running his hand not over the rocky wall, but through the thin air, as though expecting to find and grip something invisible. Oh, said Dumbledore happily seconds later. His hand had closed in midair upon something Harry could not see. Dumbledore moved closer to the water. Harry watched nervously as the tips of Dumbledore's buckled shoes found the utmost edge of the rock rim. Keeping his hand clenched in midair, Dumbledore raised his wand with the other and tapped his fist with the point. Immediately, a thick coppery green chain appeared out of thin air, extending from the depths of the water into Dumbledore's clenched hand. Dumbledore tapped the chain, which began to slide through his fist like a snake, coiling itself on the ground with a clinking sound that echoed noisily off the rock walls, pulling something from the depths of the black water. Harry gasped as the ghostly prow of a tiny boat broke the surface, glowing as green as the chain, and floated with barely a ripple toward the place on the bank where Harry and Dumbledore stood. How did you know that was there? Harry asked in astonishment. Magic always leaves traces, said Dumbledore as the boat hit the bank with a gentle bump. Sometimes very distinctive traces. I taught Tom Riddle. I know his style. Is this boat safe? Oh, yes, I think so. Voldemort needed to create a means to cross the lake without attracting the wrath of those creatures he had placed within it, in case he ever wanted to visit or remove his Horcrux. So the things in the water won't do anything to us if we cross in Voldemort's boat? I think we must resign ourselves to the fact that they will, at some point, realize we are not Lord Voldemort. Thus far, however, we have done well. They have allowed us to raise the boat. But why have they let us? Asked Harry, who could not shake off the vision of tentacles rising out of the dark water the moment they were out of sight of the bank. Voldemort would have been reasonably confident that none but a very great wizard would have been able to find the boat, said Dumbledore. I think he would have been prepared to risk what was, to his mind, the most unlikely possibility that somebody else would find it, knowing that he had set other obstacles ahead that only he would be able to penetrate. We shall see whether he is right. Harry looked down into the boat. It really was very small. It doesn't look like it was built for two people. Will it hold both of us? Will we be too heavy together? Dumbledore chuckled. Voldemort will not have cared about the weight, but about the amount of magical power that crossed his lake. I rather think an enchantment will have been placed upon this boat so that only one wizard at a time will be able to sail in it. But then, I do not think you will count, Harry. You are underage and unqualified. Voldemort would never have expected a 16-year-old to reach this place. I think it unlikely that your powers will register compared to mine." These words did nothing to raise Harry's morale. Perhaps Dumbledore knew it, for he added, "Voldemort's mistake, Harry. Voldemort's mistake. Age is foolish and forgetful when it underestimates youth. Now, you first this time, and be careful not to touch the water." Dumbledore stood aside and Harry climbed carefully into the boat. Dumbledore stepped in too, coiling the chain onto the floor. They were crammed in together. Harry could not comfortably sit, but crouched, his knees jutting over the edge of the boat, which began to move at once. There was no sound, other than the silken rustle of the boat's prow cleaving the water. It moved without their help, as though an invisible rope was pulling it onward towards the light in the center. Soon they could no longer see the walls of the cavern. They might have been at sea, except there were no waves. Harry looked down and saw the reflected gold of his wand light sparkling and glittering on the black water as they passed. The boat was carving deep ripples upon the glassy surface, grooves in a dark mirror. And then Harry saw it, marble white, floating inches below the surface. "Professor!" he said, and his startled voice echoed loudly over the silent water. "Harry, I think I saw a hand in the water, a human hand." "Yes, I am sure you did," said Dumbledore calmly. Harry stared down into the water, looking for the vanished hand, and a sick feeling rose in his throat. So, that thing that jumped out of the water. But Harry had his answer before Dumbledore could reply. The wand light had slid over a fresh patch of water and showed him, this time, a dead man, lying face up inches beneath the surface, his open eyes misted as though with cobwebs, his hair and his robes swirling around him like smoke. "There are bodies in here," said Harry, and his voice sounded much higher than usual and most unlike his own. "Yes," said Dumbledore placidly, "but we need not worry about them at the moment." "At the moment?" Harry repeated, tearing his gaze from the water to look at Dumbledore. "Not while they are merely drifting peacefully below us," said Dumbledore. "There is nothing to be feared from a body, Harry, any more there is to be feared from darkness. Lord Voldemort, who of course secretly fears both, disagrees, but once again he reveals his own lack of wisdom. It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." Harry said nothing. He did not want to argue, but he found the idea that there were bodies floating around them and beneath them horrible, and what was more, he did not believe that they were not dangerous. "But one of them jumped," he said, trying to make his voice as level and calm as Dumbledore's. "When I tried to summon the Horcrux, a body leapt out of the lake." "Yes," said Dumbledore. "I am sure that once we take the Horcrux, we shall find them less peaceable. However, like many creatures that dwell in cold and darkness, they fear light and warmth, which we shall therefore call to our aid should the need arise. Fire, Harry," Dumbledore added with a smile in response to Harry's bewildered expression. "Oh, right," said Harry quickly. He turned his head to look at the greenish glow toward which the boat was still inexorably sailing. He could not pretend now that he was not scared. The great black lake teeming with the dead. It seemed hours and hours ago that he had met Professor Trelawney, that he had given Ron and Hermione Felix Felicis. He suddenly wished he had said a better goodbye to them. And he hadn't seen Ginny at all. "Nearly there," said Dumbledore cheerfully. Sure enough, the greenish light seemed to be growing larger at last, and within minutes the boat had come to a halt, bumping gently into something that Harry could not see at first. But when he raised his illuminated wand, he saw that they had reached a small island of smooth rock in the center of the lake. "Careful not to touch the water," said Dumbledore again as Harry climbed out of the boat. The island was no larger than Dumbledore's office, an expanse of flat, dark stone, on which stood nothing but the source of that greenish light, which looked much brighter when viewed close to. Harry squinted at it. At first he thought it was a lamp of some kind, but then he saw that the light was coming from a stone basin, rather like the Pensieve, which was set on top of a pedestal. Dumbledore approached the basin, and Harry followed. Side by side they looked down into it. The basin was full of an emerald liquid, emitting that phosphorescent glow. "What is it?" asked Harry quietly. "I am not sure," said Dumbledore. "Something more worrisome than blood and bodies, however." Dumbledore pushed back the sleeve of his robe over his blackened hand and stretched out the tips of his burned fingers toward the surface of the potion. "Sir, no, don't touch!" "I cannot touch," said Dumbledore, smiling faintly. "See, I cannot approach any nearer than this. You try." Staring, Harry put his hand into the basin and attempted to touch the potion. He met an invisible barrier that prevented him coming within an inch of it. No matter how hard he pushed, his fingers encountered nothing but what seemed to be solid and inflexible air. "Out of the way, please, Harry," said Dumbledore. He raised his wand and made a complicated movement over the surface of the potion, murmuring soundlessly. Nothing happened, except perhaps that the potion glowed a little brighter. Harry remained silent while Dumbledore worked, but after a while Dumbledore withdrew his wand, and Harry felt it was safe to talk again. "You think the Horcrux is in there, sir?" "Oh, yes." Dumbledore peered more closely into the basin. Harry saw his face reflected upside down in the smooth surface of the green potion. "But how to reach it? This potion cannot be penetrated by hand, vanished, parted, scooped up, or siphoned away, nor can it be transfigured, charmed, or otherwise made to change its nature." Almost absent-mindedly, Dumbledore raised his wand again, twirled it once in midair, and then caught the crystal goblet that he had conjured out of nowhere. "I can only conclude that this potion is supposed to be drunk." "What?" said Harry. "No!" "Yes, I think so. Only by drinking it can I empty the basin and see what lies in its depths." "But what if it kills you?" "Oh, I doubt it would work like that," said Dumbledore easily. "Lord Voldemort would not want to kill the person who reached this island." Harry couldn't believe it. Was this more of Dumbledore's insane determination to see good in everyone? "Sir," said Harry, trying to keep his voice reasonable. "Sir, this is Voldemort. I'm sorry, Harry. I should have said he would not want to immediately kill the person who reached this island." Dumbledore corrected himself. "He would want to keep them alive long enough to find out how they managed to penetrate so far through his defenses, and most importantly of all, why they were so intent upon emptying the basin. Do not forget that Lord Voldemort believes that he alone knows about his Horcruxes." Harry made to speak again, but this time Dumbledore raised his hand for silence, frowning slightly at the emerald liquid, evidently thinking hard. "Undoubtedly," he said finally, "this potion must act in a way that will prevent me taking the Horcrux. It may paralyze me, cause me to forget what I am here for, create so much pain I am distracted, or render me incapable in some other way. This being the case, Harry, it will be your job to make sure I keep drinking, even if you have to tip the potion into my protesting mouth. You understand?" Their eyes met over the basin, each pale face lit with that strange green light. Harry did not speak. Was this why he had been invited along, so that he could force-feed Dumbledore a potion that might cause him unendurable pain? "You remember," said Dumbledore, "the condition on which I brought you with me." Harry hesitated, looking into the blue eyes that had turned green in the reflected light of the basin. "But what if you swore, did you not, to follow any command I gave you?" "Yes, but I warned you, did I not, that there might be danger?" "Yes," said Harry, "but—" "Well then," said Dumbledore, shaking back his sleeves once more and raising the empty goblet, "you have my orders." "Why can't I drink the potion instead?" asked Harry desperately. "Because I am much older, much cleverer, and much less valuable," said Dumbledore. "Once and for all, Harry, do I have your word that you will do all in your power to make me keep drinking?" "Do I have it? But your word, Harry!" All right, but..." Before Harry could make any further protest, Dumbledore lowered the crystal goblet into the potion. For a split second, Harry hoped that he would not be able to touch the potion with the goblet, but the crystal sank into the surface as nothing else had. When the glass was full to the brim, Dumbledore lifted it to his mouth. "Your good health, Harry." And he drained the goblet. Harry watched terrified, his hands gripping the rim of the basin so hard that his fingertips were numb. "Professor," he said anxiously as Dumbledore lowered the empty glass, "how do you feel?" Dumbledore shook his head, his eyes closed. Harry wondered whether he was in pain. Dumbledore plunged the glass blindly back into the basin, refilled it, and drank once more. In silence, Dumbledore drank 3 goblets full of the potion. Then, halfway through the 4th goblet, he staggered and fell forward against the basin. His eyes were still closed, his breathing heavy. "Professor Dumbledore?" said Harry, his voice strained. "Can you hear me?" Dumbledore did not answer. His face was twitching, as though he was deeply asleep, but dreaming a horrible dream. His grip on the goblet was slackening. The potion was about to spill from it. Harry reached forward and grasped the crystal cup, holding it steady. "Professor, can you hear me?" he repeated loudly, his voice echoing around the cavern. Dumbledore panted, and then spoke in a voice Harry did not recognize, for he had never heard Dumbledore frightened like this. "I don't want. Don't make me." Harry stared into the whitened face he knew so well, at the crooked nose and half-moon spectacles, and did not know what to do. Want to stop," moaned Dumbledore. You can't stop, Professor," said Harry. "You've got to keep drinking, remember? You told me you had to keep drinking. Here." Hating himself, repulsed by what he was doing, Harry forced the goblet back toward Dumbledore's mouth and tipped it so that Dumbledore drank the remainder of the potion inside. "No," he groaned as Harry lowered the goblet back into the basin and refilled it for him. "I don't want to. I don't want to. Let me go." "It's all right, Professor," said Harry, his hand shaking. "It's all right. I'm here." "Make it stop. Make it stop," moaned Dumbledore. Yes, this'll make it stop," lied Harry. He tipped the contents of the goblet into Dumbledore's open mouth. Dumbledore screamed. The noise echoed all around the vast chamber, across the dead black water. No, I can't. Don't make me. I don't want to." "It's all right, Professor, it's all right," said Harry loudly, his hand shaking so badly he could hardly scoop up the sixth goblet full of potion. The basin was now half empty. "Nothing's happening to you. You're safe. It isn't real. I swear it isn't real. Take this now. Take this." And obediently Dumbledore drank, as though it was an antidote Harry offered him. But upon draining the goblet, he sank to his knees, shaking uncontrollably. "It's all my fault. All my fault," he sobbed. "Please make it stop. I know I did wrong. Oh, please make it stop. I'll never again." "This will make it stop, Professor," Harry said, his voice cracking as he tipped the seventh glass of potion into Dumbledore's mouth. Dumbledore began to cower, as though invisible torturers surrounded him. His flailing hand almost knocked the refilled goblet from Harry's trembling hands as he moaned, Don't hurt them, please. It's my fault. Hurt me instead." "Here, drink this. You'll be all right," said Harry desperately, and once again Dumbledore obeyed him, opening his mouth even as he kept his eyes tight shut and shook from head to foot. And now he fell forward, screaming again, hammering his fists upon the ground, while Harry filled the ninth goblet. Please, no, not that, I'll do anything." "Just drink, Professor, just drink." Dumbledore drank like a child dying of thirst, but when he had finished, he yelled again as though his insides were on fire. "No more, please, no more!" Harry scooped up a 10th goblet full of potion and felt the crystal scrape the bottom of the basin. "We're nearly there, Professor. Drink this. Drink it." He supported Dumbledore's shoulders, and again Dumbledore drained the glass. Then Harry was on his feet once more, refilling the goblet as Dumbledore began to scream in more anguish than ever. I want to die! Make it stop! I want to die!" "Drink this, Professor. Drink this." Dumbledore drank, and no sooner had he finished than he yelled, "Kill me!" This one will," gasped Harry. "Just drink this. It'll be over, all over." Dumbledore gulped at the goblet, drained every last drop, and then with a great rattling gasp, rolled over onto his face. "No!" shouted Harry, who had stood to refill the goblet again. Instead, he dropped the cup into the basin, flung himself down beside Dumbledore, and heaved him over onto his back. Dumbledore's glasses were askew, his mouth agape, his eyes closed. "No," said Harry, shaking Dumbledore. "No, you're not dead. You said it wasn't poison. Wake up! Renervate!" he cried, his wand pointing at Dumbledore's chest. There was a flash of red light, but nothing happened. "Renervate! Sir, please!" Dumbledore's eyelids flickered. Harry's heart leapt. "Sir, are you—" "Water," croaked Dumbledore. "Water?" panted Harry. "Yes." He leapt to his feet and seized the goblet he had dropped in the basin. He barely registered the golden locket lying curled beneath it. "Aguamenti!" he shouted, jabbing the goblet with his wand. The goblet filled with clear water. Harry dropped to his knees beside Dumbledore, raised his head and brought the glass to his lips. But it was empty. Dumbledore groaned and began to pant. "No, I had some! Wait! Aguamenti!" said Harry again, pointing his wand at the goblet. Once more, for a second, clear water gleamed within it, but as he approached Dumbledore's mouth, the water vanished again. "Sir, I'm trying, said Harry desperately, but he did not think that Dumbledore could hear him. He had rolled onto his side and was drawing great, rattling breaths that sounded agonizing. Aguamenti! The goblet filled and emptied once more, and now Dumbledore's breathing was fading. His brain whirling in panic, Harry knew instinctively the only way left to get water, because Voldemort had planned it so. He flung himself over to the edge of the rock and plunged the goblet into the lake, bringing it up full to the brim of icy water that did not vanish. "Sir, here!" Harry yelled, and lunging forward, he tipped the water clumsily over Dumbledore's face. It was the best he could do, for the icy feeling on his arm, not holding the cup, was not the lingering chill of the water. A slimy white hand had gripped his wrist, and the creature to whom it belonged was pulling him slowly backward across the rock. The surrounding face of the lake was no longer mirror smooth. It was churning, and everywhere Harry looked, white heads and hands were emerging from the dark water. Men and women and children with sunken, sightless eyes were moving toward the rock, an army of the dead rising from the black water. "Crucifix Totalis!" yelled Harry, struggling to cling to the smooth, soaked surface of the island as he pointed his wand at the Infurius that had his arm. It released him, falling backward into the water with a splash. He scrambled to his feet, but many more Inferi were already climbing onto the rock, their bony hands clawing at its slippery surface, their blank, frosted eyes upon him, trailing waterlogged rags, sunken faces leering. "Crucifix Totalis!" Harry bellowed again, backing away as he swept his wand through the air. 6 or 7 of them crumpled, but more were coming toward him. "Impedimenta! Incarcerus!" A few of them stumbled. 1 or 2 of them bound in ropes, but those climbing onto the rock behind them merely stepped over or on their fallen bodies. Still slashing at the air with his wand, Harry yelled, "Sectum Sempra! Sectum Sempra!" But though gashes appeared in their sodden rags and their icy skin, they had no blood to spill. They walked on, unfeeling, their shrunken hands outstretched toward him, and as he backed away still farther, he felt arms enclose him from behind, thin, fleshless arms, cold as death, and his feet lift from the ground as they lifted him and began to carry him slowly and surely back to the water. And he knew there would be no release, that he would be drowned and become one more dead guardian of a fragment of Voldemort's shattered soul. But then, through the darkness, fire erupted. Crimson and gold, a ring of fire that surrounded the rock so that the Inferi holding Harry so tightly stumbled and faltered. They did not dare pass through the flames to get to the water. They dropped Harry. He hit the ground, slipped on the rock, and fell grazing his arms, but scrambled back up, raising his wand and staring around. Dumbledore was on his feet again, pale as any of the surrounding Inferi, but taller than any two. The fire dancing in his eyes, his wand raised like a torch, and from its tip emanated the flames like a vast lasso, encircling them all with warmth. The Inferi bumped into each other, attempting blindly to escape the fire in which they were enclosed. Dumbledore scooped the locket from the bottom of the stone basin and stowed it inside his ropes. Wordlessly, he gestured to Harry to come to his side. Distracted by the flames, the Inferi seemed unaware that their quarry was leaving, as Dumbledore led Harry back to the boat, the ring of fire moving with them, around them, the bewildered Inferi accompanying them to the water's edge, where they slipped gratefully back into their dark waters. Harry, who was shaking all over, thought for a moment that Dumbledore might not be able to climb into the boat. He staggered a little as he attempted it. All his efforts seemed to be going into maintaining the ring of protective flame around them. Harry seized him and helped him back to his seat. Once they were both safely jammed inside, the boat began to move back across the black water, away from the rock, still encircled by that ring of fire, and it seemed that the Inferi swarming below them did not dare resurface. "Sir," panted Harry, "Sir, I forgot about fire. They were coming at me and I panicked." "Quite understandable," murmured Dumbledore. Harry was alarmed to hear how faint his voice was. They reached the bank with a little bump, and Harry leapt out and then turned quickly to help Dumbledore. The moment that Dumbledore reached the bank, he let his wand hand fall. The ring of fire vanished, but the Inferi did not emerge again from the water. The little boat sank into the water once more, clanking and tinkling. Its chain slithered back into the lake too. Dumbledore gave a great sigh and leaned against the cavern wall. "I am weak," he said. "Don't worry, sir," said Harry at once, anxious about Dumbledore's extreme pallor and by his air of exhaustion. "Don't worry, I'll get us back. Lean on me, sir." And pulling Dumbledore's uninjured arm around his shoulders, Harry guided his headmaster back around the lake, bearing most of his weight. "The protection was, after all, well designed," said Dumbledore faintly. "One alone could not have done it. You did well, very well, Harry." "Don't talk now," said Harry, fearing how slurred Dumbledore's voice had become, how much his feet dragged. "Save your energy, sir. We'll be soon out of here." "The archway will have sealed again. My knife—" "There's no need. I got cut on the rock," said Harry firmly. "Just tell me where." "Here." Harry wiped his grazed forearm upon the stone. Having received its tribute of blood, the archway reopened instantly. They crossed the outer cave and Harry helped Dumbledore back into the icy sea water that filled the crevice in the cliff. "It's going to be all right, sir," Harry said over and over again, more worried by Dumbledore's silence than he had been by his weakened voice. "We're nearly there. I can apparate us both back. Don't worry." "I am not worried, Harry," said Dumbledore. His voice was a little stronger despite the freezing water. "I am with you." Chapter 27. The Lightning-Struck Tower. Once back under the starry sky, Harry heaved Dumbledore onto the top of the nearest boulder and then to his feet. Sodden and shivering, Dumbledore's weight still upon him, Harry concentrated harder than he had ever done upon his destination, Hogsmeade. Closing his eyes, gripping Dumbledore's arm as tightly as he could, he stepped forward into that feeling of horrible compression. He knew it had worked before he opened his eyes. The smell of salt, the sea breeze, had gone. He and Dumbledore were shivering and dripping in the middle of the dark high street in Hogsmeade. For one horrible moment, Harry's imagination showed him more Inferi creeping toward him around the sides of shops, but he blinked and saw that nothing was stirring. All was still, the darkness complete but for a few street lamps and lit upper windows. "We did it, Professor!" Harry whispered with difficulty. He suddenly realized that he had a searing stitch in his chest. "We did it! We got the Horcrux!" Dumbledore staggered against him. For a moment, Harry thought that his inexpert apparition had thrown Dumbledore off balance. Then he saw his face, paler and damper than ever, in the distant light of a street lamp. "Sir, are you all right?" "I've been better," said Dumbledore weakly, though the corners of his mouth twitched. "That potion was no health drink." And to Harry's horror, Dumbledore sank onto the ground. "Sir, it's okay, sir. You're going to be all right. Don't worry." He looked around desperately for help, but there was nobody to be seen, and all he could think was that he must somehow get Dumbledore quickly to the hospital wing. "We need to get you up to school, sir. Madame Pomfrey—" "No," said Dumbledore. "It is Professor Snape whom I need. But I do not think I can walk very far just yet." "Right. Sir, listen, I'm going to knock on a door, find a place you can stay, then I can run and get Madame—" "Severus," said Dumbledore clearly. "I need Severus." "All right then, Snape. But I'm going to have to leave you for a moment so I can—" Before Harry could make a move, however, he heard running footsteps. His heart leapt. Somebody had seen. Somebody knew they needed help. And looking around, he saw Madame Rosmerta scurrying down the dark street toward them on high-heeled fluffy slippers, wearing a silk dressing gown embroidered with dragons. "I saw you apparate as I was pulling my bedroom curtains. Thank goodness, thank goodness. I couldn't think what to— But what's wrong with Albus?" She came to a halt, panting, and stared down wide-eyed at Dumbledore. "He's hurt," said Harry. "Madame Rosmerta, can he come into the Three Broomsticks while I go up to the school and get help for him?" "You can't go up there alone. Don't you realize? Haven't you seen?" "If you help me support him," said Harry, not listening to her, "I think we can get him inside." "What has happened?" said Dumbledore. "Rosmerta, what's wrong?" The dark mark, Albus!" And she pointed into the sky, in the direction of Hogwarts. Dread flooded Harry at the sound of these words. He turned and looked. There it was, hanging in the sky above the school, the blazing green skull with a serpent tongue, the mark Death Eaters left behind whenever they had entered a building, whenever they had murdered. "When did it appear?" asked Dumbledore, and his hand clenched painfully upon Harry's shoulder as he struggled to his feet. "Must have been minutes ago. It wasn't there when I put the cat out, but when I got upstairs—" "We need to return to the castle at once," said Dumbledore. "Rosmerta," and though he staggered a little, he seemed wholly in command of the situation. "We need transport. Brooms." "I've got a couple behind the bar," she said, looking very frightened. "Shall I run and fetch—" "No, Harry can do it." Harry raised his wand at once. "Accio Rosmerta's brooms!" A second later they heard a loud bang as the front door of the pub burst open. Two brooms had shot out into the street and were racing each other to Harry's side, where they stopped dead, quivering slightly at waist height. "Rosmerta, please send a message to the Ministry," said Dumbledore as he mounted the broom nearest him. "It might be that nobody within Hogwarts has yet realized anything is wrong. Harry, put on your invisibility cloak." Harry pulled his cloak out of his pocket and threw it over himself before mounting his broom. Madame Rosmerta was already tottering back toward her pub as Harry and Dumbledore kicked off from the ground and rose up into the air. As they sped toward the castle, Harry glanced sideways at Dumbledore, ready to grab him should he fall. But the sight of the dark mark seemed to have acted upon Dumbledore like a stimulant. He was bent low over his broom, his eyes fixed upon the mark. his long silver hair and beard flying behind him on the night air. And Harry too looked ahead of the skull, and fear swelled inside him like a venomous bubble, compressing his lungs, driving all other discomfort from his mind. How long had they been away? Had Ron, Hermione, and Ginny's luck run out by now? Was it one of them who had caused the mark to be set over the school, or was it Neville, or Luna, or some other member of the DA? And if it was, he was the one who had told them to patrol the corridors. He had asked them to leave the safety of their beds. Would he be responsible again for the death of a friend? As they flew over the dark, twisting lane down which they had walked earlier, Harry heard, over the whistling of the night air in his ears, Dumbledore muttering in some strange language again. He thought he understood why as he felt his broom shudder when they flew over the boundary wall into the grounds. Dumbledore was undoing the enchantments he himself had set around the castle so they could enter at speed. The dark mark was glittering directly above the astronomy tower, the highest of the castle. Did that mean the death had occurred there? Dumbledore had already crossed the crenellated ramparts and was dismounting. Harry landed next to him seconds later and looked around. The ramparts were deserted. The door to the spiral staircase that led back into the castle was closed. There was no sign of a struggle, of a fight to the death, of a body. What does it mean? Harry asked Dumbledore, looking up at the green skull with its serpent's tongue glinting evilly above them. Is it the real mark? Has somebody definitely been... Professor? In the dim green glow from the mark, Harry saw Dumbledore clutching at his chest with his blackened hand. Go and wake Severus, said Dumbledore faintly but clearly. Tell him what has happened and bring him to me. Do nothing else. Speak to nobody else. And do not remove your cloak. I shall wait here. But you swore to obey me, Harry. Go! Harry hurried over to the door leading to the spiral staircase, but his hand had only just closed upon the iron ring of the door when he heard running footsteps on the other side. He looked around at Dumbledore, who gestured him to retreat. Harry backed away, drawing his wand as he did so. The door burst open, and somebody erupted through it and shouted, Expelliarmus! Harry's body became instantly rigid and immobile, and he felt himself fall back against the tower wall, propped like an unsteady statue, unable to move or speak. He could not understand how it had happened. Expelliarmus was not a freezing charm. Then, by the light of the mark, he saw Dumbledore's wand flying in an arc over the edge of the ramparts, and understood. Dumbledore had wordlessly immobilized Harry, and the second he had taken to perform the spell had cost him the chance of defending himself. Standing against the ramparts, very white in the face, Dumbledore still showed no sign of panic or distress. He merely looked across at his disarmor and said, Good evening, Draco. Malfoy stepped forward, glancing around quickly to check that he and Dumbledore were alone. His eyes fell upon the second broom. Who else is here? A question I might ask you. Or are you acting alone? Harry saw Malfoy's pale eyes shift back to Dumbledore in the greenish glare of the mark. No, he said. I've got backup. There are Death Eaters here in your school tonight. Well, said Dumbledore, as though Malfoy was showing him an ambitious homework project. Very good indeed. You found a way to let them in, did you? Yeah, said Malfoy, who was panting. Right under your nose, and you never realized. Ingenious, said Dumbledore. Yet, forgive me, where are they now? You seem unsupported. They met some of your guards. They're having a fight down below. They won't be long. I came on ahead. I've got a job to do. Well, then you must go on and do it, my dear boy, said Dumbledore softly. There was silence. Harry stood imprisoned within his own invisible paralyzed body, staring at the two of them, his ears straining to hear sounds of Death Eaters distantly fighting, and in front of him, Draco Malfoy did nothing but stare at Albus Dumbledore, who, incredibly, smiled. Draco, you are not a killer. How do you know? Said Malfoy at once. He seemed to realize how childish the words had sounded. Harry saw him flush in the mark's greenish light. You don't know what I'm capable of, said Malfoy more forcefully. You don't know what I've done. Oh, yes, I do, said Dumbledore mildly. You almost killed Katie Bell and Ronald Weasley. You have been trying with increasing desperation to kill me all year. Forgive me, Draco, but they have been feeble attempts. So feeble, to be honest, that I wondered whether your heart has really been in it. It has been in it, said Malfoy vehemently. I've been working on it all year, and tonight... Somewhere in the depths of the castle below, Harry heard a muffled yell. Malfoy stiffened and glanced over his shoulder. Somebody is putting up a good fight, said Dumbledore conversationally.
But you were saying, yes, you have managed to introduce Death Eaters into my school, which, I admit, I thought impossible. How did you do it?
But Malfoy said nothing. He was still listening to whatever was happening below and seemed almost as paralyzed as Harry was.
Perhaps you ought to get on with his job alone, suggested Dumbledore. What if your backup has been thwarted by my guard? As you perhaps realize, there are members of the Order of the Phoenix here tonight, too. And after all, you don't really need help. I have no wand at the moment. I cannot defend myself.
Malfoy merely stared at him.
I see,
said Dumbledore kindly, when Malfoy neither moved nor spoke.
You are afraid to act until they join you.
I'm not afraid, snarled Malfoy, though he still made no move to hurt Dumbledore. It's you who should be scared.
But why? I don't think you will kill me, Draco. Killing is not nearly as easy as the innocent believe. So tell me, while we wait for your friends, how did you smuggle them in here? It seems to have taken you a long time to work out how to do it.
Malfoy looked as though he was fighting down the urge to shout or to vomit. He gulped and took several deep breaths, glaring at Dumbledore, his wand pointing directly at the latter's heart. Then, as though he could not help himself, he said, I had to mend that broken vanishing cabinet that no one's used for years. The one Montague got lost in last year. Dumbledore's sigh was half a groan. He closed his eyes for a moment.
That was clever. There is a pair, I take it.
In Borgin and Burke's, said Malfoy, and they make a kind of passage between them. Montague told me that when he was stuck in Hogwarts one, he was trapped in limbo, but sometimes he could hear what was going on at school, and sometimes what was going on in the shop, and if the cabinet was traveling between them, but he couldn't make anyone hear him. In the end, he managed to apparate out, even though he'd never passed his test. He nearly died doing it. Everyone thought it was a really good story, but I was the only one who realized what it meant. Even Borgin didn't know. I was the one who realized that there could be a way into Hogwarts through the cabinets if I fixed the broken one.
Very good, murmured Dumbledore. So the Death Eaters were able to pass from Borgin and Burke's into the school to help you. A clever plan. A very clever plan. And as you say, right under my nose.
Yeah, said Malfoy, who seemed bizarrely to draw courage and comfort from Dumbledore's praise. Yeah, it was.
But there were times, Dumbledore went on, weren't there, when you were not sure you would succeed in mending the cabinet? And you resorted to crude and badly judged measures such as sending me a cursed necklace that was bound to reach the wrong hands, poisoning me there was only the slightest chance I might drink.
Yeah, well, you still didn't realize who was behind that stuff, did you? Sneered Malfoy as Dumbledore slid a little down the ramparts, the strength in his legs apparently fading, and Harry struggled fruitlessly, mutely, against the enchantment binding him.
As a matter of fact, I did, said Dumbledore. I was sure it was you.
Why didn't you stop me then? Malfoy demanded.
I tried, Draco. Professor Snape has been keeping watch over you on my orders.
He hasn't been doing your orders. He promised my mother.
Of course, that is what he would tell you, Draco, but...
He's a double agent, you stupid old man. He isn't working for you. You just think he is.
We must agree to differ on that, Draco. It so happens that I trust Professor Snape.
Well, you're losing your grip then, sneered Malfoy. He's been offering me plenty of help, wanting all the glory for himself, wanting a bit of the action. What are you doing? Did you do the necklace? That was stupid. It could have blown everything. But I haven't told him what I've been doing in the Room of Requirement. He's going to wake up tomorrow, and it'll all be over, and he won't be the Dark Lord's favorite anymore. He'll be nothing compared to me. Nothing!
Very gratifying, said Dumbledore mildly. We all like appreciation for our own hard work, of course. But you must have had an accomplice all the same. Someone in Hogsmeade, someone who was able to slip Katie the...
Dumbledore closed his eyes again and nodded as though he was about to fall asleep.
Of course. Rosmerta. How long has she been under the Imperious curse?
Got there at last, have you? Malfoy taunted. There was another yell from below, rather louder than the last. Malfoy looked nervously over his shoulder again, then back at Dumbledore, who went on.
So poor Rosmerta was forced to lurk in her own bathroom and pass that necklace to any Hogwarts student who entered the room unaccompanied. And the poisoned mead, well, naturally, Rosmerta was able to poison it for you before she sent the bottle to Slughorn, believing that it was to be my Christmas present. Yes, very neat, very neat. Poor Mr. Filch would not, of course, think to check a bottle of Rosmerta's. Tell me, how have you been communicating with Rosmerta? I thought we had all methods of communication in and out of school monitored.
Enchanted coins, said Malfoy, as though he was compelled to keep talking, though his wand hand was shaking badly. I had one, and she had the other, and I could send her messages.
Isn't that the secret method of communication the group that called themselves Dumbledore's Army used last year?
Asked Dumbledore. His voice was light and conversational, but Harry saw him slip an inch lower down the wall as he said it. Yeah, I got the idea from them, said Malfoy with a twisted smile. I got the idea of poisoning the mead from the Mudblood Granger as well. I heard her talking in the library about Filch not recognizing potions.
Please do not use that offensive word in front of me,
said Dumbledore. Malfoy gave a harsh laugh. You care about me saying Mudblood when I'm about to kill you?
Yes, I do,
said Dumbledore, and Harry saw his feet slide a little on the floor as he struggled to remain upright.
But as for being about to kill me, Draco, you have had several long minutes now. We are quite alone. I am more defenseless than you can have dreamed of finding me, and still you have not acted.
Malfoy's mouth contorted involuntarily, as though he had tasted something very bitter.
Now, about tonight,
Dumbledore went on.
I am a little puzzled about how it happened. You knew that I had left the school, but of course...
He answered his own question.
Rosmerta saw me leaving. She tipped you off using your ingenious coins, I'm sure.
That's right, said Malfoy. But she said you were just going for a drink. You'd be back.
Well, I certainly did have a drink. And I came back, after a fashion,
mumbled Dumbledore.
So you decided to spring a trap for me?
We decided to put the dark mark over the tower and get you to hurry up here to see who'd been killed, said Malfoy. And it worked!
Well, yes and no,
said Dumbledore.
But I am to take it then that nobody has been murdered.
Somebody's dead, said Malfoy, and his voice seemed to go up an octave as he said it. One of your people. I don't know who. It was dark. I stepped over the body. I was supposed to be waiting up here when you got back. Only your Phoenix lock got in the way.
Yes, they do that.
There was a bang and shouts from below, louder than ever. It sounded as though people were fighting on the actual spiral staircase that led to where Dumbledore, Malfoy, and Harry stood, and Harry's heart thundered, unheard, in his invisible chest. Someone was dead. Malfoy had stepped over the body. But who was it?
There is little time one way or the other, said Dumbledore. So let us discuss your options, Draco.
My options? Said Malfoy loudly. I'm standing here with a wand. I'm about to kill you.
My dear boy, let us have no more pretense about that. If you were going to kill me, you would have done it when you first disarmed me. You would not have stopped for this pleasant chat about ways and means.
I haven't got any options, said Malfoy, and he was suddenly white as Dumbledore. I've got to do it. He'll kill me. He'll kill my whole family.
I appreciate the difficulty of your position, said Dumbledore. Why else do you think I have not confronted you before now? Because I knew that you would have been murdered if Lord Voldemort realized that I suspected you.
Malfoy winced at the sound of the name.
I did not dare speak to you of the mission with which I knew you had been entrusted in case he used legitimacy against you, continued Dumbledore. But now at last we can speak plainly to each other. No harm has been done, Draco. You have hurt nobody, though you are very lucky that your unintentional victim survived. I can help you, Draco.
No, you can't, said Malfoy, his wand hand shaking very badly indeed. Nobody can. He told me to do it, or he'll kill me. I've got no choice.
Come over to the right side, Draco, and we can hide you more completely than you can possibly imagine. What is more, I can send members of the Order to your mother tonight to hide her likewise. Your father is safe at the moment in Azkaban. When the time comes, we can protect him too. Come over to the right side, Draco. You are not a killer.
Malfoy stared at Dumbledore. But I got this far, didn't I? He said slowly. They thought I'd die in the attempt. But I'm here, and you're in my power. I'm the one with the wand. You're at my mercy.
No, Draco,
said Dumbledore quietly.
It is my mercy, and not yours, that matters now.
Malfoy did not speak. His mouth was open, his wand hand still trembling. Harry thought he saw it drop by a fraction. But suddenly footsteps were thundering up the stairs, and a second later Malfoy was buffeted out of the way as 4 people in black robes burst through the door onto the ramparts. Still paralyzed, his eyes staring unblinkingly, Harry gazed in terror upon 4 strangers. It seemed the Death Eaters had won the fight below. A lumpy-looking man with an odd, lopsided leer gave a wheezy giggle.
Oh
Dumbledore cornered, he said, and he turned to a stocky little woman who looked as though she could be his sister, and who was grinning eagerly. Dumbledore wanless, Dumbledore alone. Well done, Draco, well done.
Good evening, Amicus,
said Dumbledore calmly, as though welcoming the man to a tea party.
And you've brought Alecto, too. Charming.
The woman gave an angry little titter. Think your jokes will help you on your deathbed, then? She jeered.
Jokes? No. These are manners,
replied Dumbledore. Do it, said the stranger standing nearest to Harry, a big, rangy man with matted grey hair and whiskers, whose black Death Eater's robes looked uncomfortably tight. He had a voice like none that Harry had ever heard, a rasping bark of a voice. Harry could smell a powerful mixture of dirt, sweat, and unmistakably of blood coming from him. His filthy hands had long, yellowish nails.
Is that you, Fenrir?
Asked Dumbledore. That's right, rasped the other. Pleased to see me, Dumbledore.
No, I cannot say that I am.
Greyback grinned, showing pointed teeth. Blood trickled down his chin, and he licked his lips slowly, obscenely. But you know how much I like kids, Dumbledore.
Am I to take it that you are attacking even without the full moon now? This is most unusual. You have developed a taste for human flesh that cannot be satisfied once a month.
That's right, said Fenrir Greyback. Shocks you, that, doesn't it, Dumbledore? Frightens you?
Well, I cannot pretend that it does not disgust me a little, said Dumbledore. And yes, I am a little shocked that Draco here invited you, of all people, into the school where his friends live.
I didn't, breathed Malfoy. He was not looking at Fenrir, but did not seem to want to even glance at him. I didn't know he was going to come. I wouldn't want to miss a trip to Hogwarts, Dumbledore, rasped Greyback. Not when there are throats to be ripped out. Delicious, delicious. And he raised a yellowed fingernail and picked his front teeth, leering at Dumbledore. I could do you for afters, Dumbledore. No, said the fourth Death Eater sharply. He had a heavy, brutal-looking face. We've got orders. Draco's got to do it. Now, Draco, do it quickly. Malfoy was showing less resolution than ever. He looked terrified as he stared into Dumbledore's face, which was even paler and rather lower than usual as he had slid so far down the rampart wall. He's not long for this world anyway, if you ask me, said the lopsided man, to the accompaniment of his sister's wheezing giggles. Look at him. What's happened to you then, Dumby?
Oh, weaker resistance. Slower reflexes, Amicus, said Dumbledore. Old age, in short. One day, perhaps, it will happen to you. If you are lucky.
Oh, what's that mean, then? What's that mean? Yelled the Death Eater, suddenly violent. What was the saying, weren't you, Dumby? Talking and doing nothing. Nothing! I don't even know why the Dark Lord's bothering to kill you. Come on, Draco, do it! But at that moment there were renewed sounds of scuffling from below, and a voice shouted, They blocked the stairs! Reducto! Reducto! Harry's heart leapt. So these four had not eliminated all opposition, but merely broken through the fight to the top of the tower, and by the sound of it, created a barrier behind them. Now, Draco, quickly, said the brutal-faced man angrily. But Malfoy's hand was shaking so badly that he could barely aim. I'll do it, snarled Fenrir, moving toward Dumbledore with his hands outstretched, his teeth bared. I said no! Shouted the brutal-faced man. There was a flash of light, and the werewolf was blasted out of the way. He hit the ramparts and staggered, looking furious. Harry's heart was hammering so hard it seemed impossible that nobody could hear him, standing there, imprisoned by Dumbledore's spell. If he could only move, he could aim a curse from under the cloak. Draco, do it to stand aside, so one of us, screeched the woman, but at that precise moment the door to the ramparts burst open once more, and there stood Snape, his wand clutched in his hand, as his black eyes swept the scene, from Dumbledore slumped against the wall, to the four Death Eaters, including the enraged werewolf and Malfoy. We've got a problem, Snape, said the lumpy Amicus, whose eyes and wand were fixed alike upon Dumbledore. The boy doesn't seem able... But somebody else had spoken Snape's name, quite softly.
Severus?
The sound frightened Harry beyond anything he had experienced all evening. For the first time, Dumbledore was pleading. Snape said nothing, but walked forward and pushed Malfoy roughly out of the way. The three Death Eaters fell back without a word. Even the werewolf seemed cowed. Snape gazed for a moment at Dumbledore, and there was revulsion and hatred etched in the harsh lines of his face.
Severus, please.
Snape raised his wand and pointed it directly at Dumbledore. Avada Kedavra! A jet of green light shot from the end of Snape's wand and hit Dumbledore squarely in the chest. Harry's scream of horror never left him. Silent and unmoving, he was forced to watch as Dumbledore was blasted into the air. For a split second, he seemed to hang suspended beneath the shining skull, and then he fell slowly backward like a great rag doll, over the battlements and out of sight. Chapter 28. Flight of the Prince. Harry felt as though he too were hurtling through space. It had not happened. It could not have happened. "Out of here, quickly," said Snape. He seized Malfoy by the scruff of the neck and forced him through the door ahead of the rest. Greyback and the squat brother and sister followed, the latter both panting excitedly. As they vanished through the door, Harry realized he could move again. What was now holding him paralyzed against the wall was not magic, but horror and shock. He threw the invisibility cloak aside as the brutal-faced Death Eater, last to leave the tower top, was disappearing through the door. "Petrificus Totalis!" The Death Eater buckled as though hit in the back with something solid and fell to the ground, rigid as waxwork. But he had barely hit the floor when Harry was clambering over him and running down the darkened staircase. Terror tore at Harry's heart. He had to get to Dumbledore, and he had to catch Snape. Somehow the two things were linked. He could reverse what had happened if he had them both together. Dumbledore could not have died. He leapt the last 10 steps of the spiral staircase and stopped where he landed, his wand raised. The dimly lit corridor was full of dust. Half the ceiling seemed to have fallen in, and a battle was raging before him. But even as he attempted to make out who was fighting whom, he heard the hated voice shout, "It's over! Time to go!" and saw Snape disappearing around the corner at the far end of the corridor. He and Malfoy seemed to have forced their way through the fight unscathed. As Harry plunged after them, one of the fighters detached themselves from the fray and flew at him. It was the werewolf, Fenrir. He was on top of Harry before Harry could raise his wand. Harry fell backward, with filthy, matted hair in his face, the stench of sweat and blood filling his nose and mouth, hot, greedy breath at his throat. "Petrificus Totalis!" Harry felt Fenrir collapsed against him. With a stupendous effort, he pushed the werewolf off and onto the floor as a jet of green light came flying toward him. He ducked and ran headfirst into the fight. His feet met something squashy and slippery on the floor, and he stumbled. There were 2 bodies lying there, face down, in a pool of blood, but there was no time to investigate. Harry now saw red hair flying like flames in front of him. Ginny was locked in combat with the lumpy Death Eater, Amicus, who was throwing hex after hex at her while she dodged them. Amicus was giggling, enjoying the sport. "Crucio! Crucio! You can't dance forever, pretty!" "Impedimenta!" yelled Harry. His jinx hit Amicus in the chest. He gave a pig-like squeal of pain, was lifted off his feet, and slammed into the opposite wall, slid down it, and fell out of sight behind Ron, Professor McGonagall, and Lupin, each of whom was battling a separate Death Eater. Beyond them, Harry saw Tonks fighting an enormous blonde wizard who was sending curses flying in all directions, so that they ricocheted off the walls around them, cracking stone, shattering the nearest window. "Harry, where did you come from?" Ginny cried, but there was no time to answer her. He put his head down and sprinted forward, narrowly avoiding a blast that erupted over his head, showering them all in bits of wall. Snape must not escape. He must catch up with Snape. "Take that!" shouted Professor McGonagall. And Harry glimpsed the female Death Eater, Alecto, sprinting away down the corridor with her arms over her head, her brother right behind her. He launched himself after them, but his foot caught on something, and next moment he was lying across someone's legs. Looking around, he saw Neville's pale, round face flat against the floor. "Neville, are you—"
"I'm all right,"
muttered Neville, who was clutching his stomach.
"Harry, Snape and Malfoy ran past."
"I know, I'm on it," said Harry, aiming a hex from the floor at the enormous blonde Death Eater, who was causing most of the chaos. The man gave a howl of pain as the spell hit him in the face. He wheeled around, staggered, and then pounded away after the brother and sister. Harry scrambled up from the floor and began to sprint along the corridor, ignoring the bangs issuing from behind him, the yells of the others to come back, and the mute call of the figures on the ground, whose fate he did not yet know. He skidded around the corner, his trainers slippery with blood. Snape had an immense head start. Was it possible that he had already entered the cabinet in the Room of Requirement? Or had the Order made steps to secure it to prevent the Death Eaters retreating that way? He could hear nothing but his own pounding feet, his own hammering heart as he sprinted along the next empty corridor, but then spotted a bloody footprint that showed at least one of the fleeing Death Eaters was heading toward the front doors. Perhaps the Room of Requirement was indeed blocked. He skidded around another corner, and a curse flew past him. He dived behind a suit of armor that exploded. He saw the brother and sister running down the marble staircase ahead and aimed jinxes at them, but merely hit several bewigged witches in a portrait on the landing, who ran screeching into neighboring paintings. As he leapt the wreckage of armor, Harry heard more shouts and screams. Other people within the castle seemed to have awoken. He pelted toward a shortcut, hoping to overtake the brother and sister and close in on Snape and Malfoy, who must surely have reached the grounds by now. Remembering to leap the vanishing step halfway down the concealed staircase, he burst through a tapestry at the bottom and out into a corridor where a number of bewildered and pajama-clad Hufflepuffs stood. "Harry! We heard a noise and someone said something about the Dark Mark," began Ernie Macmillan. "Out of the way!" yelled Harry, knocking two boys aside as he sprinted toward the landing and down the remainder of the marble staircase. The oak front doors had been blasted open. There were smears of blood on the flagstones, and several terrified students stood huddled against the walls, one or two still cowering with their arms over their faces. The giant Gryffindor hourglass had been hit by a curse, and the rubies within were still falling with a loud rattle onto the flagstones below. Harry flew across the entrance hall and out into the dark grounds. He could just make out three figures racing across the lawn, heading for the gates beyond which they could disapparate. By the looks of them, the huge blonde Death Eater, and some way ahead of him, Snape and Malfoy. The cold night air ripped at Harry's lungs as he tore after them. He saw a flash of light in the distance that momentarily silhouetted his quarry. He did not know what it was, but continued to run, not yet near enough to get a good aim with a curse. Another flash, shouts, retaliatory jets of light, and Harry understood. Hagrid had emerged from his cabin and was trying to stop the Death Eaters escaping. And though every breath seemed to shred his lungs and the stitch in his chest was like fire, Harry sped up as an unbidden voice in his head said, "Not Hagrid! Not Hagrid too!" Something caught Harry hard in the small of the back and he fell forward, his face smacking the ground, blood pouring out of both nostrils. He knew even as he rolled over, his wand ready, that both the brother and sister he had overtaken using his shortcut were closing in behind him. "Impedimenta!" he yelled as he rolled over again, crouching close to the dark ground. And miraculously, his jinx hit one of them, who stumbled and fell, tripping up the other. Harry leapt to his feet and sprinted on after Snape. And now he saw the vast outline of Hagrid, illuminated by the light of the crescent moon, revealed, suddenly behind the clouds. The blonde Death Eater was aiming curse after curse at the gamekeeper, but Hagrid's immense strength and the toughened skin he had inherited from his giantess mother seemed to be protecting him. Snape and Malfoy, however, were still running. They would soon be beyond the gates, able to disapparate. Harry tore past Hagrid and his opponent, took aim at Snape's back, and yelled, "Stupefy!" He missed. The jet of red light soared past Snape's head. Snape shouted, "Run, Draco!" and turned. 20 yards apart, he and Harry looked at each other before raising their wands simultaneously. Croosh! But Snape parried the curse, knocking Harry backward off his feet before he could complete it. Harry rolled over and scrambled back up again as the huge Death Eater behind him yelled, "Incendio!" Harry heard an explosive bang, and a dancing orange light spilled over all of them. Hagrid's house was on fire. "Fangs in there, you're evil!" Hagrid bellowed. "Croosh!" yelled Harry for the second time, aiming for the figure ahead, illuminated in the dancing firelight. But Snape blocked the spell again. Harry could see him sneering. "No unforgivable curses from you, Potter!" he shouted over the rushing of the flames, Hagrid's yells, and the wild yelping of the trapped Fang. "You haven't got the nerve or the ability." "Incarce!" Harry roared, but Snape deflected the spell with an almost lazy flick of his arm. "Fight back!" Harry screamed at him. "Fight back, you cowardly—" "Coward, did you call me, Potter?" shouted Snape. "Your father would never attack me unless it was 4-on-1. What would you call him, I wonder? Stupa blocked again and again and again until you learn to keep your mouth shut and your mind closed, Potter," sneered Snape, deflecting the curse once more. "Now come!" he shouted at the huge Death Eater behind Harry. "It is time to be gone before the ministry turns up. Impeda!" Before he could finish his jinx, excruciating pain hit Harry. He keeled over in the grass. Someone was screaming. He would surely die of this agony. Snape was going to torture him to death or madness. "No!" roared Snape's voice, and the pain stopped as suddenly as it had started. Harry lay curled on the dark grass, clutching his wand and panting. Somewhere overhead, Snape was shouting, "Have you forgotten our orders? Potter belongs to the Dark Lord. We are to leave him. Go! Go!" And Harry felt the ground shudder under his face as the brother and sister and the enormous Death Eater obeyed, running toward the gates. Harry uttered an inarticulate yell of rage. In that instant, he cared not whether he lived or died. Pushing himself to his feet again, he staggered blindly towards Snape, the man he now hated as much as he hated Voldemort himself. "Sectum!" Snape flicked his wand, and the curse was repelled yet again. But Harry was mere feet away now, and he could see Snape's face clearly at last. He was no longer sneering or jeering. The blazing flames showed a face full of rage. Mustering all his powers of concentration, Harry thought, "No, Potter!" screamed Snape. There was a loud bang, and Harry was soaring backward, hitting the ground hard again, and this time his wand flew out of his hand. He could hear Hagrid yelling, and Fang howling as Snape closed in and looked down on him where he lay, wandless and defenseless, as Dumbledore had been. Snape's pale face, illuminated by the flaming cabin, was suffused with hatred, just as it had been before he had cursed Dumbledore. "You dare use my own spells against me, Potter? It was I who invented them. I, the half-blood prince. And you'd turn my inventions on me like your filthy father, would you? I don't think so. No!" Harry had dived for his wand. Snape shot a hex at it, and it flew feet away into the darkness and out of sight. "Kill me, then," panted Harry, who felt no fear at all, but only rage and contempt. "Kill me like you killed him, you coward!" "Don't!" screamed Snape, and his face was suddenly demented, inhuman, as though he was in as much pain as the yelping, howling dog stuck in the burning house behind him. "Call me coward!" And he slashed at the air. Harry felt a white-hot, whip-like something hit him across the face, and he was slammed backward into the ground. Spots of light burst in front of his eyes, and for a moment, all the breath seemed to have gone from his body. Then he heard a rush of wings above him, and something enormous obscured the stars. Buckbeak had flown at Snape, who staggered backward as the razor-sharp claws slashed at him. As Harry raised himself into a sitting position, his head still swimming from its last contact with the ground, he saw Snape running as hard as he could, the enormous beast flapping behind him and screeching as Harry had never heard him screech. Harry struggled to his feet, looking around groggily for his wand, hoping to give chase again, but even as his fingers fumbled in the grass, discarding twigs, he knew it would be too late. And sure enough, by the time he had located his wand, he turned only to see the hippogriff circling the gates. Snape had managed to disapparate just beyond the school's boundaries. "Hagrid," muttered Harry, still dazed, looking around. "Hagrid!" He stumbled toward the burning house as an enormous figure emerged from out of the flames, carrying Fang on his back. With a cry of thankfulness, Harry sank to his knees. He was shaking in every limb. His body ached all over, and his breath came in painful stabs. "You all right, Harry? You all right? Speak to me, Harry!" Hagrid's huge hairy face was swimming above Harry, blocking out the stars. Harry could smell burnt wood and dog hair. He put out a hand and felt Fang's reassuringly warm and alive body quivering beside him. "I'm all right," panted Harry. "Are you?" "Course I am. Take more than that to finish me." Hagrid put his hands under Harry's arms and raised him up with such force that Harry's feet momentarily left the ground before Hagrid set him upright again. He could see blood trickling down Hagrid's cheek from a deep cut under one eye, which was swelling rapidly. "We should put out your house," said Harry. "The charm's augmenti." "I knew it was something like that," mumbled Hagrid, and he raised a smouldering pink flowery umbrella and said, "Augmenti!" A jet of water flew out of the umbrella tip. Harry raised his wand arm, which felt like lead, and murmured, "Augmenti," too. Together, he and Hagrid poured water on the house until the last flame was extinguished. "It's not too bad," said Hagrid hopefully a few minutes later, looking at the smoking wreck. "Nothing Dumbledore won't be able to put right." Harry felt a searing pain in his stomach at the sound of the name. In the silence and the stillness, horror rose inside him. "Hagrid." "I was binding up a couple of Bowtruckle legs when I heard him coming," said Hagrid sadly, still staring at his wrecked cabin. "They'll have been burnt to twigs, poor little things." "Hagrid." "But what happened, Harry? I just saw them Death Eaters running down from the castle, but what the bloody hell was Snape doing with them? Where's he gone? Was he chasing them?" Harry cleared his throat. He was dry from panic and the smoke. "Hagrid, he killed." "Killed?" said Hagrid loudly, staring down at Harry. "Snape killed? What are you on about, Harry?" "Dumbledore," said Harry. "Snape killed Dumbledore." Hagrid simply looked at him, the little of his face that could be seen completely blank, uncomprehending. "Dumbledore what, Harry?" "He's dead. Snape killed him." "Don't say that," said Hagrid roughly. "Snape killed Dumbledore? Don't be stupid, Harry. What's made you say that?" "I saw it happen." "You couldn't have." "I saw it, Hagrid." Hagrid shook his head. His expression was disbelieving, but sympathetic, and Harry knew that Hagrid thought he'd been sustained a blow to the head, or that he was confused, perhaps, by the after effects of a jinx. "What must have happened was Dumbledore must have told Snape to go with them Death Eaters," Hagrid said confidently.
I suppose he's got to keep his cover. Look, let's get you back up to school. Come on, Harry.
Harry did not attempt to argue or explain. He was still shaking uncontrollably. Hagrid would find out soon enough. Too soon. As they directed their steps back toward the castle, Harry saw that many of its windows were lit now. He could imagine clearly the scenes inside as people moved from room to room, telling each other that Death Eaters had got in, that the mark was shining over Hogwarts, that somebody must have been killed. The oak doors stood open ahead of them, light flooding out onto the drive and the lawn. Slowly, uncertainly, dressing-gowned people were creeping down the steps, looking around nervously for some sign of the Death Eaters who had fled into the night. Harry's eyes, however, were fixed upon the ground at the foot of the tallest tower. He imagined that he could see a black, huddled mass lying in the grass there, though he really was too far away to see anything of the sort. Even as he stared wordlessly at the place where he thought Dumbledore's body must be, however, he saw people beginning to move toward it.
"What are they all looking at?"
said Hagrid as he and Harry approached the castle front, Fang keeping as close as he could to their ankles.
"What's that lying on the grass?"
Hagrid added sharply, heading now toward the foot of the astronomy tower where a small crowd was congregating.
"See it, Harry? Right at the foot of the tower. Under where the mark... Blimey! You don't think someone got thrown?"
Hagrid fell silent, the thought apparently too horrible to express aloud. Harry walked alongside him, feeling the aches and pains in his face and his legs where the various hexes of the last half hour had hit him, though in an oddly detached way, as though somebody near him was suffering them. What was real and inescapable was the awful pressing feeling in his chest. He and Hagrid moved, dreamlike, through the murmuring crowd to the very front, where the dumbstruck students and teachers had left a gap. Harry heard Hagrid's moan of pain and shock, but he did not stop. He walked slowly forward until he reached the place where Dumbledore lay and crouched down beside him. He had known there was no hope from the moment that the full body-bind curse Dumbledore had placed upon him lifted, known that it could have happened only because its caster was dead. But there was still no preparation for seeing him there, spread-eagled, broken. The greatest wizard Harry had ever, or would ever, meet. Dumbledore's eyes were closed, but for the strange angle of his arms and legs, he might have been sleeping. Harry reached out, straightened the half-moon spectacles upon the crooked nose, and wiped a trickle of blood from the mouth with his own sleeve. Then he gazed down at the wise old face and tried to absorb the enormous and incomprehensible truth that never again would Dumbledore speak to him. Never again could he help. The crowd murmured behind Harry. After what seemed like a long time, he became aware that he was kneeling upon something hard and looked down. The locket they had managed to steal so many hours before had fallen out of Dumbledore's pocket. It had opened, perhaps, due to the force with which it hit the ground, and although he could not feel more shock or horror or sadness than he felt already, Harry knew as he picked it up that there was something wrong. He turned the locket over in his hands. There was neither as large as the locket he remembered seeing in the Pensieve, nor were there any markings upon it, no sign of the ornate S that was supposed to be Slytherin's mark. Moreover, there was nothing inside but for a scrap of folded parchment wedged tightly into the place where a portrait should have been. Automatically, without really thinking about what he was doing, Harry pulled out the fragment of parchment, opened it, and read by the light of the many wands that had now been lit behind him. To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B. Harry neither knew nor cared what the message meant. Only one thing mattered. This was not a Horcrux. Dumbledore had weakened himself by drinking that terrible potion for nothing. Harry crumpled the parchment in his hand, and his eyes burned with tears as behind him, Fang began to howl.